I'm really happy that when I spoke to Ken, he didn't hesitate in offering to be part of our program. I'm sure that many of you know that there are very few, if any, important events in Collingwood that take place without Ken being present in his very colorful regalia to lend not only glamour but vitality to the proceedings in his role as Collingwood's town crier. Ken is also a prominent member of our local pipe band, where he is what few people are today, a mentor to many of the young members of that pipe band, and how important that role is for older people. Not that Ken is old, he's just older than the young people he mentors. Of course, he's well known as an Ontario street businessman, and in each and every one of these positions, Ken proves to be one of our town's greatest and most respected promoters of the town. I'm pleased to welcome Ken this evening to the Collingwood District Historical Society, and I invite him to begin his presentation. Welcome, Ken.
You did? They did. Which goes to prove that you, and only you, can prevent florist friars. God save the Queen!
Good evening, everyone. That cry I performed in 1981 in Anacortes, Washington for the World Tongue Crying Championship. That was my number 3 humor cry, and it fell flat. I thought the American West Pacific Northwest would know who Smokey the Bear was, and they thought he was a cop. So, thank you for inviting me to speak to you this evening. We all know that history is full of mystery, scandal, and intrigue, and hopefully we'll not hear any of that tonight. I have broken my talk into 4 parts: the history of town crying as it was years ago, the history of the Ontario Guild of Town Criers, history of our black town criers, and then my own personal story. Let's start with the definition of a town crier. Basically, A town crier is a person appointed by the court to deliver messages. The court, in my case, is the Council of Collingwood. So let's start at the very beginning. Well, not quite. We have evidence of it being Spartan Romans in ancient years, but we consider our start after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. William the Conqueror invades England from the French coast of Normandy with the help of thousands of French Normans. The only time a successful invasion of England has ever taken place. He met his somewhat, I think, half-brother. I couldn't find just what the relation was, but King Harold took the crown from Edward the Confessor when he passed away, and it was promised to Harold. Harold did not like this promise, or the fact that it was stolen, so he went after it. And a great battle was fought near Hastings, and Harold won. Kicked out all the Saxon landowners and installed the Norman knights who helped him and paid them off. One of the ways that he needed to communicate to his Norman friends, he needed a way to get there quickly. He needed to know where they were. He needed to know all the information that's out there. So he enlisted the highest ranking soldier that was not a knight. I kind of understand that would be equal maybe to a chief warrant officer today, kind of thing. This person was tasked to ride from village to village and cry out his message from the king. Should someone try to do harm from him, or to him, it was considered to do harm to the crown. And to do harm from the crown was a treasonous event. So if you interfered with the town crier, you could end up in the stockade, or at worst, losing your head over it. There's little fooling around when the town crier showed up, and that's where we get, don't shoot the messenger. I hope. The town crier would come into the village and using a bell, or a drum, or a horn, and get everyone's attention. He would cry out 3 Oyez, like I did tonight. Oyez is the old French word for hear me, not hear ye, which is a movie version of it. It's attributed to Cecil B. DeMille, who was making a period movie. They had a town crier from England come over to play this part. He only had to do the cry. They gave him his script, called for action, and the first thing he did was cry out, Oyez, Oyez. Oh, wait a minute here, Cecil B. DeMille said, what the heck are you doing there? And he said, I'm starting my cry. Well, what does that mean? It means hear me. Well, we want to speak American, so it's going to be hear ye. And that's why we get some of our American friends today will say hear ye, although in many courts in the States where they have court criers, before the judge comes out, they will call for Oyez. So here our intrepid hero would be at the village. Where does he go? Well, there used to be a great battle between pubs to see who would have him there. For if you could gather a crowd outside the pub and give the message, what does everybody do? they go in for a beer and they talk about it. So the publicans all had a battle as to who would be hosting the town crier. They would bring the town crier in, give him a free beer, which has happened today, sometimes. And that tradition in England still stands today. If a town crier goes outside of a pub and does a cry, it's one of those unwritten traditions. The publican will come out and say, please come in for a beer. Now that he's finished, he's going to go in, he's going to take his piece of paper, and for those who can read, he will post it on either the hitching post, the message post, or bulletin board or the door of the pub. This is posting a notice. And very often is considered the very beginning of newspapers, because that's where they got their name, such as the New York Post. Someone might come up to him and say, are you going to the next village? He says, yes, I am. Would you take this for me? I have a letter from my sister. Yes, but I'll need, I'm not working for free here. So they would post a letter. Sometimes the crier would be given the task of escorting a person of nobility. Not necessarily the king or queen, but it might be a lord, it might be a duke, it might be somebody of esteemed position. They would be their close personal bodyguard, and he only had a belt for a defensive weapon, and sometimes they used it. And that's where the phrase, his face rings a bell, comes from. The appointment of town crier has often been seen as a hereditary position, a family right, being passed from father to son, or in the event of the son of the family not being old enough, the town crier passes away, the wife would take it over. And many examples of this exist in the history in England. They had to feed the family. This is what they knew how to do. This is what they did. And the one that we often see is an old woman by the name of Betty Dick. And she had a big metal spoon and a wooden platter. And I guess that she could make a lot of noise with that. And she would go and they would pay her to do their duty. As people became literate, the printing press took over. Town crying became more ceremonial than functional, and in many communities it just died away. Today there are about between 400 and 500 town criers in the world. So there's not that many. But they are in the United Kingdom, Belgium, the Netherlands, Australia, the Caribbean, New Zealand, USA, and Canada. And there may be a few others around, but that's Denmark, Finland, there could be. The history of the Ontario Guild of Town Criers. In 1984, the province of Ontario was celebrating a bicentennial and asked communities to appoint a town crier to come to Toronto to proclaim your town. Today we call that a hometown cry. This group of around 20 went down to Toronto. They had a wonderful time, got to know each other, and said, we don't want to stop doing this. So they formed a guild. And in 1985, they were incorporated as the Ontario Guild of Town Criers, with a mission statement to promote the art of town crying, preserve its history, and promote competition among its members. Today we have about 55 members. with several affiliate members from other countries, other provinces, and they all operate under our strict code of ethics. Each year we have an annual competition. In 2008, I hosted the competition here in Collingwood, and this year it's in Kitchener-Waterloo during Oktoberfest. That was my competition was the second competition to be held in Collingwood. The very first competition was hosted by Collingwood's second town crier, Ben Bennett. Ben was the editor for the Enterprise Bulletin, and being English, he was appointed, he knew all about it. And so Ron Emo, our mayor of the day, appointed him as town crier, and he did quite well when he was asked, Ron did quite well when he was asked to do the cry, by the way. But Ben was our town crier up until the early 90s, when he moved away to Guelph to start a new job. I have been instrumental in the appointments of Roy Wilson of Wasaga Beach, Art LaPointe in the town of the Blue Mountains, Bruce Kruger in the town of Bracebridge, and Steve Travers in the city of Barrie. As I said earlier, it's sometimes a family thing, and my daughter Jennifer is the town crier for Bygone Days Heritage Village, and is currently awaiting an appointment in Hanover. We refer to our dress as uniforms, not costumes, because we are all officially appointed representatives of our community, and the uniforms are as varied as the criers themselves. The one I'm wearing tonight was made by my lovely wife, Marianne. I wear two styles of uniform. This one I wear for more stately events. And I have a top hat and morning coat that I wear for weddings or retirement parties or something in the backyard, a birthday party or something like that. You pass these. When I designed this uniform, as with that, I wanted to stick to a Victorian period. Collingwood's birthday is January 1st, 1858, not 1958. And I wanted to stick to something Victorian. That is definitely a Victorian look. And I searched many history books before I found a uniform such as this. This is a militia-style uniform, patterned 1854 to 1857. That's why they're so hard to find pictures of, because the officers didn't like wearing them, so they cut them and made them single-breasted, and that is exactly what you'll see today in the #1 dress of our ceremonial guard at, say, the Parliament Building in Ottawa. It's all 1858 and 59 style, and they haven't changed all those years. But I didn't want to replicate that. I wanted something a little different. Now, I mentioned earlier competitions. I've been in many. And everybody asks how they're judged. It's not easy. We competition score out of 100 points. And to achieve that, we are judged on entrance and exit. You saw how we come in tonight use of attention-getting device. In my case, it's a bell. Some might use a horn. We have one use a bosun's whistle. A friend of mine used a drum, or used to, until he went to fire the drumsticks into his holder on a wooden stage, and he missed the holder, and they went clang, 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 clang down the stage. Doesn't do that anymore. Appropriate manner for style of uniform, which is to say that if in a military look I should move in a military manner, or if I dress as a gentleman, I should move in a gentlemanly manner. Marianne is my escort. She accompanies in her dress, but escorts are not judged as part of the competition. They have their own competition amongst themselves where they will be judged as, say, best dressed. The next, clarity and projection. The enunciation of words, no slurring. Diction and phrases. Well-placed pauses to allow proper breathing. There's nothing worse than standing up there in front of the mirror. Loss of voice, hoarseness, cracking, failure to maintain a constant level. What is called a sustained volume. I can start out with 3 oyes, quite loud. Step it down a notch, but maintain that level all the way through. If I get quiet and tired and worn out, I get judged on it. Our call content. We are always given a topic. My cry this evening was humor. So I told a joke. Sometimes it can be something quite serious, but not usually. Town criers have a pretty good sense of humor. We use language that is appropriate for the era, which is to say that if we were doing a cry on the Opera House downtown, I might have to refer to something in say 1858. That would be Queen Victoria. I would still have to say God Save the Queen. But if I was doing something in say 1941 era, oh wait a minute, we had a king. So I had to say God Save the King. If I don't, I get points. I'll take it away. Comprehension. Topic must make sense and not become lost or confusing. Continuity and flow, smooth and logical. Now, we usually have a town crier who's retired for this position. And he becomes, or she, becomes the penalty judge. And they start off a little bit different. When your name is called, you got 100 points. And as they listen and read your cry, because every time I do a cry, I have to submit a copy to the penalty judge, and they'll sit there with a pen, and if I deviate from my cry, if I add a word, forget a word, or my voice cracks, or I go over the word count, which is 125 words, they're right there, and they're sharp, and they know what they're doing. And then I get what's left over. And goodness sakes, it's never happened to me. But if I was to walk away and thank you very much and leave my bell, that would be a big penalty. Now that's town crying and all that, but this is the interesting stuff. I find this just fascinating. I'm going to talk about our black town criers. As I said a minute ago, Ben Bennett was our second, which makes me the third. Who's the first? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. But first, I want to talk about John Daddy Hall. During the preparation for a cry at the Owen Sound Emancipation Festival a few years ago now, I contacted the Grey County Museum and asked about information about the topic, John Daddy Hall. I had no idea who it was. That was just, it was given to me, John Daddy Hall. So I found out that he was born in 1783, a free-born black in Amherstburg, Ontario. His father was a Mohawk Indian. The mother, an escaped slave from the American South. He became one of 11 siblings. All were captured by slave traders and taken to a plantation in Kentucky. His father was on a hunting party with his Mohawk brothers. We never heard or saw of them again. But for John, he would come to marry a slave from the same plantation, and together they escaped via the Underground Railroad and ended up in Sydenham in the early 1850s. He lived there until his death, claiming squatters' rights. Being a black on the run and landing somewhere, how do you get a job? Who's going to trust you? What skills do you have? We figure, we assume that he saw town criers somewhere. Could have been in Charleston, North Carolina. We don't know. But for over 50 years, he was the walking newspaper announcing auctions, court cases, and upcoming entertainment, merchant sales, and daily news in the city of Owen Sound. He would start his day at 10 a.m. on the corner of 3rd and 3rd Street and 10th Avenue, ring his bell with a characteristic flair, shout his message, and then move to another corner and repeat it, and move to another corner and repeat it until he had covered his jurisdiction. He would then come back at 2 p.m. and do it all over again. He earned the nickname Daddy. As it is said to, he has had to father 21 children with 3 wives and possibly 2 others. His funeral was attended by hundreds, mostly family. When he passed away, and he must have had the secret for longevity at the age of 117 years. So during that cry, I had to do a cry on that. The town crier from Woodstock, Scott Fraser, who I'll talk about in a little bit, varied from the cry a little bit. He talked about George Washington Jones, their black town crier. We know that he was born into slavery in 1856, and he showed up in Woodstock age 69 in 1925. He immediately employed himself by pacing the streets with a sandwich board, announcing merchant sales, upcoming events, just the same as John Daddy Hall did. He wore a swallowtail coat and a top hat decorated with ribbons and medals, and he rung a bell. Locals would hire him to announce their specials, sporting events, and local activities. He was just a poor black man. Now, we've all seen 2 or multiple story buildings where the stairway is outside. And we've all seen them where they've been enclosed. Well, in an alley, that's where George Washington Jones slept, in the enclosed area of their stairwell. No washroom, no heat, no electricity. They had a small cot in there, and that was about it. And he lived in there. He used the public washroom at a local gas station for his daily devotion. He died there in 1951, age 95. He didn't come out. Where is he? Better go find him. Died in his sleep. The town merchants chipped in, paid for his funeral, and then they closed their businesses. It's one of the largest parades in downtown Woodstock had ever seen, his procession. That building was to burn down eventually. And in 2004, the town of Woodstock named that alley, or what, it's a park now, but where the alley was, they have named it George Washington Jones Walk. Now, when I phoned the Grey County Museum and asked if I could get information on John Daddy Hall, the young lady I was talking to said, well, why don't you do a cry on your own town crier? And I went, what? What are you talking about? Well, Collingwood had their own town crier. He was a black fellow by the name of Elijah Pycraft. Now, we don't know much about him. The Black History Museum has nothing written down. They rely mostly on oral history. The problem I have found with oral history is that stories change. But we do know some things. He was born in Maryland in 1805. He married Carolyn Tyler in Pennsylvania, and they must have made their way here possibly through the Underground Railroad. She was a slave as well. We know that he was a member of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, where it is said that he gave the loudest responses. We're not sure where they lived. It's either in the Old Village or East Ward, which for those who don't know where that is, it's about where the YMCA is now. Or they might have lived on Beach Street with a group over there. We do know that he was a noted fiddler, and he played on many shipping excursions around the bay. He was listed in the 1871 census as age 67, and Carolyn was aged 65. They had a daughter, Victoria, who was born in the States, and her daughter, Olivia Augusta, was born here in Collingwood. Oral history says that he rang his bell and made the same announcements as we have heard before. And I'd like to thank Jeannie Cooper and Carol Stewart for going on the Ancestor.ca and finding that for me. It should be noted, because we've come across these town criers, our guild felt it appropriate that we name them honorary members, and they have been awarded a plaque. The Black History Museum out near Thornbury has Elijah Pycraft's plaque. The George Washington Jones Walk has our plaque underneath it in Woodstock. And the Emancipation Festival in Owen Sound has, the committee have John Daddy Hall's plaque, and I'm not sure where it is. I know they have it. But now I get to talk about myself. It's 7:45. Bring pillows and blankets. Let's go back to 1996, the fall, September. I got a phone call. Could you come to a meeting? We are holding a meeting for the promotions committee for the downtown Collingwood. The Chamber of Commerce do not want to run the Santa Claus Parade anymore. The BIA is taking it over. We don't know how to do it. We need all the help we can get. can you come? I said, okay, sure. So I attended this meeting. During the meeting, and somebody, to this day I have no idea who it was, said we should have our town crier lead the parade. And I went and opened my big fat mouth and said, we don't have a town crier anymore. Ben moved away. Oh, nobody knew that. Well, doesn't Stainer have town crier? And I said, yes, they do. Well, they don't. George has moved away as well. George Wilson moved away. Okay. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do nothing. Well, no. Seeing as how you look like a town crier, would you lead the parade? And I said, wait a minute, what do you mean I look like a town crier? Well, you do. And I said, no, I have no interest in doing that. But then Lois Woolnow from Lunar Expressions, when she owned the store, said, I have a costume. I think it would fit you. You should do that. No, I can't. I don't have anything to ring. I don't have a bell. Then Yvonne Prince from Unique Place said, well, I have a bell. She sold gifts and kept a stock of bells because teachers would get a bell on their retirement. So these two got me outfitted, and I kind of looked a little weird. I had this bright purple, one-size-fits-all pants and a tunic. They took a tricorn hat that I'm sure is fit for children, and I had to cut the brim all to pieces so I could get it on my big noggin. I had the bell. And before I could do that, I spray painted my duckies black and put a big brass buckle on them. Cam Trott gave me a pair of white baseball socks so that I didn't have bare legs from below my knees to my ankles. And that's what I changed into after I set up the parade. Because they also taught me that my first admission was that I would be the parade marshal. Well, then I got to be town crier. So I had to go into my store, change, and then get back out, and then lead the parade. When I rung my bell to start that parade, that signaled the clouds to open up, and it poured rain. And we walked down the street in the pouring rain, and Doug Measures from Rogers was in front of the town hall, and he had the big camera on his shoulder, and he come out, and he's behind the camera, he came up behind the camera, and he said, do a cry. Do a cry. I don't know how to do a cry. So I rung the bell, I did 3 oyes, I knew that much. Did I tell you that the competition was here in Collingwood? I was the photographer. I hung around with them all weekend. And I did a cry. Welcomed everybody to the 1996 Santa Claus Parade, brought to you by the downtown Collingwood. And when I later saw that on television, Doug zoomed right in on my face, and you could see the rain bouncing off my face as I performed my very first cry. Prior to that Sunday, we also did the Dickens Walk on Friday night. And that was just a nighttime walk down the main street and around, candlelight. And the next Tuesday, I'm at work and somebody came in and he laughed and says, look at this. And he held up the newspaper. And there I am on the front page of the newspaper, Collingwood Town Crier leads parades. And it's like, oh no. Nothing like being hornswoggled into something here. So that was December. January, with promotions committee had their meeting. Congratulated me. Said I should be the town crier. It'd be a good promotional thing for Collingwood. I said, no. February come along. Have you thought about that? No, I'm doing that. Then in the springtime, March, I'm up on the roof of my house, cleaning out the eaves trough and sweeping away the debris from winter. We had a big old tree there. And my daughter came out and said, Dad, you want him on the phone? I said, who is it? Councillor Rick Lloyd. Come and talk to him. So she came up, and we had a cordless phone. She came up halfway in the ladder, tossed me the phone. And I said, Rick, what's going on? He said, we need you at council in a few minutes. Can you be here? And I said, Rick, it's late. And in those days they met at 7. And I said, I haven't had dinner yet. And he said, well, I don't care. Be at council at 7 o'clock. Why? Well, we're going to make you town crier. Okay. What had happened in the meantime is Scott had shown up at my store, the town crier from Woodstock. We talked about it. I was a little more, I knew about the guild. I had no idea how Scott knew me, but he found me, and I thought I was in deep trouble with the guild for, town crime without a license or something. And for what had happened, I found out after, was Scott at that time sold the greeting cards. And he had gone into Yvonne's store to try and get his line of greeting cards in. And Yvonne had taken those newspaper clippings and put them in the frames that she was trying to sell, the pewter frames. And Scott saw them and asked what's going on. They made a deal. You go talk to him, he's right over here. If you talk to him and get him to be our town crier, I'll buy your greeting card line. He did, she did, and here I are. So I showed up at council. I was the first item on the agenda as a deputation. Mayor Doug Garbett called me up to the front, and he says something to the effect of, I hear you want to be town crier. I think that's wonderful. Who has a motion? Councillor Rick Lloyd said, I do. He read the motion, seconded by Councillor Terry Geddes. All in favor, unanimous, and that's how I started. I had served at the will of Mayors Doug Garbett, Terry Geddes, Chris Crier, and now Sandra Cooper. Town crying, as Bruce mentioned, has led me in directions that I never thought I would ever go. In the year 2000, the town sponsored a Highland tattoo with a parade down the main street. Because it's a parade down the main street, my task from the mayor's office was to lead the parade. I wore my red long coat, tricorn hat, and led this Scottish parade. That did not sit well with the honorary parade marshal, Ken McIver. What's this Brit doing leading that Scottish parade, he says. And I said, well, it's the only thing I have. And he turned to Terry and said, you have to get him outfitted before next year, properly. Terry went, okay. What Ken wanted, Ken got. So I was given an honorarium, and I took it over to Barry, and I had a Highland uniform made, jacket, tunic. The next year, I wore my kilt and that Highland tunic. That still didn't satisfy Mr. McIver. I didn't have a feather bonnet. I didn't have a mace. And I said, well, I've seen the price of that stuff. That's bloody expensive. A feather bonnet, easily runs $500. And the mace, they're imported from Pakistan, I think. Mine is. But the one he had, I don't know where it come from. But they're easily $300 to $400. And I don't have that kind of money. I'm not spending that. Okay. A couple of days later, he gets me on the phone and he says, I have something here for you. You must come over and see me. And as it was, I had a few minutes. So I hopped in my car and I went over to Ken McIver's. On the table was a feather bonnet, mace, drum pad, and 2 sets of sticks. Now understand, he said, I'm not giving this to you. You have to buy it. I am Scottish, you know. I said, yeah, I know you're Scottish. And I'm looking at this, I carry the one, add a couple of zeros. It's like well over $1,000 sitting on this table. And he said, I've got to sell it to you for at least $50. And I said, sold it. And I paid him the $50 and took off before, like the commercial, start the car. So I was prepared to lead the 3rd parade with the feather bonnet, the red tunic, the kilt, and the mace. But the 2nd parade cost the town so much they didn't have it anymore. So I wore that to the World Tongue Crying Championship in Anacortes, Washington. And had a lot of fun. And then that year, I was in 2001, and that year I wore it in Santa Claus Parade. And when we had such a long parade, the first time that when I got back to Pine Street, the parade hadn't left. And I had worn that tunic and kilt since before the parade, as parade marshal, and now everything was bunched up under the belt. And oh, is that ever uncomfortable? Especially when you got so much under the belt already. So I put my belt in the sleigh of the Santa Claus sleigh. You remember the one that had the bullet holes in it? And I'm trying to tuck this in, and somebody come up behind me, pushed me forward, put your hands on the sleigh, and he grabbed my tunic and he started shoving my shirt down in there, and he got me all straightened out. I had no idea who it was, but oh, did it ever feel good. And I turned around, it was Jim Fraser, who at that time was drum sergeant to a brand new pipes and drums called the Bangor Highlanders Pipes and Drums. And I said, thank you, Jim. And I went to get my bell. I'm done. I'm all I have to do is hand in some paychecks and I'm done. No, he says, you're not. Get out front, you're going to lead the parade, lead the band. And I said, what do you mean lead the band? I've already done the parade, what more do you want? He's lead the band. You're now going to be our drum major. And I was like, oh, I don't know anything about being a drum major. But I did. And I got partway down here in Ontario Street, and somebody yelled, Ken, you might want to slow down. The band is just coming around Loblaws, and I'm up around the town hall. Of course, I didn't know of the cadence of a marching band at that time, and I just walked away. So I waited, and I got through it. But then they wanted me to join the band and be the drum major. And I said, I can't. I don't know anything about it. I won't do anything. I don't know anything about it. Well, we do need a bass drummer. Would you play the bass drum? We'll teach you how. And then when you're comfortable, go to drum major. And I said, well, that sounded good. So I learned to play the bass drum. That is something I never ever thought would be uttered from my mouth. I'm with the band. No, not ever going to happen to me. But here I am, drum major of the band. That happened around the same time as the Legion changed teams. A new team took over. Our Legion was in serious trouble. the first question we took over when our first meeting was, do we close this Legion or do we stay and fight? And I voiced the opinion that I didn't sign on to be the one who closed it. Let's fight and see what we can do. So we did. And today it's one of the top 10 wealthiest legions in Canada. But that brought the attention of Rob Grimm, who's our president. You seem to know a lot about marching and stuff. And I said, well, no, not really. I have taken a course here and there. Well, it's a whole lot more than any of us have taken, so we need you as our Sergeant at Arms. So now I'm Sergeant at Arms at the Legion. Sometimes standing up and just introducing myself and telling everybody all of my roles is tiring enough. But it's all, in a way, has paid off. In 2008, I was awarded the Order of Collingwood for all of my volunteer activity. And that brings us to tonight. Thank you very much for inviting me. I have some pictures here. You might have seen that one already. When Marianne and I went to Scotland in 2004, we arrived at noon in Edinburgh, went up to our room, dropped our luggage, and took off running. And 5 minutes after we started our Edinburgh tour, we walked into a small museum. Up along the Royal Mile, they have a lot of small museums. And when I walked through, I heard, "Oyez, oyez, oyez!" And I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Edinburgh's town crier George Pratt welcomed me to Edinburgh. Of course, the problem was George had been dead for 200 years. They had a motion detector on their door, and when it went off, the town crier animation spoke, and there I have a picture of George in his original uniform there, and he welcomed us to Scotland. And 5 minutes later, we almost ended our trip, because in Scotland, they drive on the wrong side of the road, and in Ontario, we're taught to look left and right when we step off the curb. Because I was busy looking to the left, I didn't see the bus coming up to the right. I mentioned that in 2008, we had the, that's not, 1985, we had the competition here, and I have pictures here, you're welcome to look at them after. There's Ron Emo in the middle, all dressed up in a little hat, and that big fella there, here in blue, is Frank Knight from Scarborough. He was the very first winner of the competition. And that little one over here is Ben Bennett. He's not very tall, not very big. Frank is retired now. We don't see him often anymore. This one is Bruce Bedell, and Bruce still comes out, and he's a good friend of ours. And just to show the enormous variety of uniforms, quite often what we do as town criers is we have our image on the front of our business card. And I have a couple of here that I took out of my book before I come over, just so that you can see the enormous amount of variety. And I should mention, I stopped wearing the red coat, the British red coat look, because I showed up at a cry and all the kids ran away. And it's like, why are they running? What, my zipper down? I mean, what? And they said, no, they think you're a pirate, and they don't want you to take them away. And that was when the Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out, and all the children related to me as a pirate. And where a year before I had a circle of kids around me, now I didn't have any. So I got rid of that look and opted for a more 1858 look. So that's why I wear this and not that coat. Now, is there any questions? No? No, no dinner. Okay, I'm gonna leave some of this up here and you can look at it. Did you have a question?
Yeah, are you wearing a coat?
No,
Oh,
no, it's
it's a long coat.
a long coat. Bruce?
You described all of these stages in your married career as being sort of persuaded to take the next step. Knowing what you know now, would you be so easily persuaded if you were starting over?
Oh yeah,
Why?
I'm gullible. In Collingwood, we have worked for many years in Collingwood under one word. And I'm not going to say volunteerism. I know everybody's going to say, he's going to say volunteerism. It's not exactly that. People need help. We have many special events. We can't do those special events without people coming forward and volunteering. But sometimes you need someone who has a particular skill or vocation or just willing to get out there and work. And so one of our favorite words is voluntelling people. It'd be like, Charles, we have a thing going on and I need, or it'd be like Bruce going, Ken, we have a thing going on and we need a guest speaker. That's why. Yes, ma'am?
Do you know who's going to follow you?
Do I know who's going to follow me? Ha! Yeah, no, I don't.
Who's going to vote?
There's a lot of, and I've had, that's funny you should ask that. I have a lot of people who would like to do it. I had a chap come up to me a couple of years ago and very confidently told me that he was going to challenge me. He wants to be the town crier of Collingwood and I'm going to take your job. I said, okay, go ahead. I mean, you can go ahead and try. I mean, you can do whatever you want. He said, well, I'll just need to know who writes your cries. I write my cries. As town crier, you have to write your cries. Oh. Okay. Well, how much do you make then? I mean, you must make a whole lot doing this. I go, no. I get an honorarium from the town. And the only thing I really ever charge for is weddings. Because I found that if I don't charge for weddings, sometimes I get 3 or 4 in a day. And if I charge, then I solve that problem. So I don't make any money at this. In fact, it's probably more the other way. And I spend a lot more money than I ever make. Oh. Well then, good luck to you then.
That was it.
Thank you very much.
If we could all talk as well as Ken, there would be no need for a microphone. Thanks very much, Ken, for coming, and your lovely lady, to give us a most enjoyable talk on the history of the town criers. We really and truly enjoyed it. And in 1866, there was a directory published for Collingwood. It wasn't a business directory, it was just listed all the names of the men. And after Elijah Pycroft's name was town crier. So it was official, it wasn't hearsay, he really was. And as far George Washington, Jones, my husband was from Woodstock, and he told a lot of stories about him. And he said when the soldiers come back after the Second War, they would go up to him and say, You can call so loud we heard you all across the ocean. And the old fella believed them. And we're also glad that you wore that uniform, that you consider this a stately occasion, because we fancy ourselves rather stately too. So I hope you will accept this on behalf of the Collingwood and District Historical Society. And thank you so much.